Two Wood for a Wheat is a board game podcast. We review and criticize board games, diving deep into the strategies and mechanisms that make them great or make them forgettable.
Welcome to Two Wood for a Wheat. I'm Tony Faber.
I'm Pat Flannery.
I'm Jon Gortat.
Today, a 2023 Gen Con Roundup featuring Tony Faber and Jon Gortat discussing their most exciting plays at Gen Con 2023, the games that they're most excited for, that they got a chance to take a look at and demo, and some wonderful games that they brought home. Find out more on today's episode of Two Wood for a Wheat. How are you, Jon?
Good. I was awakened for the first time by neighbors having a domestic disturbance.
That's unpleasant.
Yeah, it was really loud. And I'm like, what? I was kind of up already, and then I was like, oh, they're fighting. It's the first time I've heard any neighbors in 4 months, so I'm not going to complain, really.
Yeah.
And they were up a couple floors for sure, so it was really loud.
Wow. Okay. Sorry to have you wake up that way. Well, thanks for joining us bright and early. The Chicagoans are out in droves today. Tina was commenting that unlike LA, no matter what your body type is here in Chicago, you're going to go out running and you're going to take your shirt off. So big people, little people, I'd love to see it because it's just like you're out there, you're working on yourself, you're making yourself feel good. I love it.
I am more struck by when Chicagoans are wearing shorts in sub-freezing weather, which is also a thing.
I'm doing the opposite. I'm wearing pants in approaching three-digit temperature right now.
Oh, we'll make an East Coaster out of you yet.
Someday. I'm amazed by those people who are in Death Valley and running in 120 degrees. They can only have a death wish, I imagine. Although I hear that some people will train in really hot weather so that they can then run in regular weather, and it's amazingly easy for them.
Yeah, that sounds like the fun of hot yoga, and I'm using fun in quotation marks. We should probably jump right in because we got a lot to cover today and a limited amount of time to do it.
Yeah, Tony, I do want to make an announcement about the podcast before we get started here, just so that people are aware of what's going on moving forward. Pretty big announcement. So, folks, we want to announce that after 5 years of doing the Two Wood for a Wheat podcast, we are going to be winding it down. Tony and I have loved every second of this. It's made us great friends and stronger partners. The reasons for winding down the podcast are manifold, and we're going to get into them. But the Cliff Note version is I'm thinking about going back to school. I am thinking about going to law school and working on climate efforts. And I am probably starting applications pretty soon, and I want to give as much time to those thoughts and to my family and my wife, Tina, and her work at starting her PsyD here in Chicago as possible, while also recognizing I still love games and I still want to be a part of these conversations and discuss everything about board games. Just I'm not going to have the kind of time coming soon to play games in the way that I would like to in order to deliver a consistent bi-weekly product.
Yes, and on my side, I've just had real difficulty since my move back to New Jersey in getting a regular game group and getting these games played as much as I want to have the episodes be great. First off, this is not our last episode. We're going to do some episodes going forward, and we might culminate in a couple of months with our Essen preview.
Yeah, it won't be this episode. It won't be next episode, but maybe probably during the Essen preview.
After that, we may come back and do episodes when we want to. We are not promising that we are going away because we still both have a passion for board games. In fact, my whole trip to Gen Con really reignited my passion for board games and getting to play a lot of games, which has been difficult at home.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear that because I can hear it in your voice already, just the vigor and enthusiasm for the hobby. So although it feels like a clash, it's actually, I'd say, a hopeful note because it means you're as into games as ever right now. And that's encouraging, and that's a good energy to walk into this episode on and walk out of the podcast on.
Before we dive into Gen Con, any quick games that you wanted to say that were new to you that you played outside of Gen Con?
Well, you and Big John are going to be discussing Gen Con this episode. Big John, who is a good friend of the podcast and from the OG Pilsen Game Group, who's now moved to California, came back together with Tony to head to Gen Con. I went to Boston to Cape Cod to visit Tina's godparents, so I was not able to go. I'm kind of the loner and the lurker in this episode, hearing about your wonderful times and the wonderful games that you guys played. But in the meantime, I did get a chance to play Mosaic. Mosaic is a 4X game, arguably, and it's one of these 4X games, civilization games in 2 hours, this heralded and fabled thing that never seems to really culminate. It has quite a chunk to it, and I've got a lot of criticisms about it, but I also want to play it 6 more times. It's one of those games that kind of confounds me. In Mosaic, what you're doing is you're one of several civilizations playing cities and towns and military units out onto a map of the Mediterranean. You've basically got hundreds of little hex areas to place out, and they're all covered in these trade goods that can collect and gold and food resources to help you build out your civilization. In this game, what you're doing is you're taking one of 8 actions. The 8 actions are to build cities and towns out onto your board, and to grab technologies that help you build out your abilities and score points at the end of the game. And then these cards also have, much like Terraforming Mars, tags on them. And these tags will do various and sundry things, one of which is you can race to get 6 of any tag and you'll get points. And you can also use these tags as they are threshold values to unlock other cards and other technologies, right? So you might need, in order to build a special type of city in a port on the coastline, you may need 2 building tags in order to build that in the first place.
Let me just note that I'm a little bit jealous and miffed because I have my own copy of Mosaic staring wistfully and sadly and unplayed from across the room, and I could never quite get you or Mitch to jump into this one before. So I'm sad that you played it first.
Let's consider it. As I said, I want to play 6 more times with Nikki. So the structure of the game, you're going around one turn by one turn by one turn, taking small actions. You're taking terrafactions, which give you money, which can be traded 2 for 1 for any resource, but then causes unrest. You're establishing governments, but they're very expensive to establish, but give you an ongoing ability. Inside of the various decks, there's 4 different decks. They're hidden empire scoring cards. And whenever those come out, you're going to score the region. So area control, and that's where the military comes in. Whoever has more control of a region is going to score for all of the cities inside of it, yours and the opponent's, as well as for various ancient wonders that people have built inside of them. So you want to be able to control regions, but you don't know exactly when these things are going to come out. They're going to come out in the second half of these decks, and once 3 of them come out, the game is going to end. So this is a really cool game. I thought I wouldn't appreciate these small texts on this kind of game. Kind of like Empires of the Void 2, when you look at these games that try to condense a 4X game into a smaller kind of design, you have to take these kind of design shortcuts by saying, well, yeah, this card does this special ability that is only specific to this card, and it allows you to do this. And that kind of gets away having to build out more mechanisms. Instead, you kind of subcontract the mechanisms out to a single card with text. And I thought that would be a pain in the butt because you'd have to read all of these cards, right? But Mosaic does it better than Empires of the Void 2 because it allows you ample time to think between turns, and it generalizes effects into categories, like this card scores points, or this card allows you to build a town. And sometimes you might just say, you know what, I don't really care what the card does, and I'll figure it out later because, as I said, a lot of the cards have these tags on them, and you have this desire for the tags, and you want these tags for these various goals. So you just say, you know what, screw it, I'll just get the tag. I'll figure out the card later. I've mentioned a lot about this game. What it comes down to is Mosaic is this efficiency race decathlon. As I said, you've got these intermittent scoring goals that one person can race to, whether it's getting 6 of any kind of tag, but there's also these other kinds of scoring that say, get 5 cities or get 3 port cities, or score 6 of the other kinds of mid-game scoring cards, or have the largest military at this moment, or have this many cavalry on the board, right? And so it's this multi-layered game system trying to score all of these points for regions and trying to score all these points for mid-game goals, and doing all of this before the game triggers semi-randomly. And it's like you're shot putting and javelin and 400-yard dashing your way to the end, likely combining a few of these game systems to maximize points. And every resource generation that you make is a grinding halt to the game. Oh, I need to make food. Oh, shoot, I need to make food in order to build a city, but that's going to take a turn, and I might have to do it twice in order to get the amount of food that I need to build that city out. And it's one less step towards a mid-game goal and one less step towards the end game. And every card flip by the second half is also a gamble for advancing the end game trigger. And you might say, yeah, I want to get, one more city out on the board to establish my presence in this region before that mid-game trigger happens with one of those empire scoring cards. But then by the act of building that city, you actually trigger that mid-game scoring. So it's got all of these trade-offs. So there's these many moments in the game thinking, I could invest in X for maybe a thing with a fairly big point payoff, or I could invest in Y for an absolutely and likely material immediate point payoff. And this game kind of seems to oppose many possible strategies across this kind of decathlon that I was talking about. But then there's also these immediacy of these goals that are just like, yeah, I'll take the 6 points, or yeah, I'll take the 8 points, whatever. Instead of building up towards these, let's say regional scoring, which maybe could be a bigger payoff, but also feels more risky. So there's a lot of seemingly risk and reward balance in this game of Mosaic. There's these zero-sum race elements. You want to be able to race towards them. And one, you keep them out of the hands of your opponents and put them in your hands. So you actually have a double differential of whatever that value is with those every mid-game goal that you collect and they don't. It seems to offer a lot of risky strategies that I want to invest in and appreciate, but I wasn't able to do in one game, which is I wanted to just race, get all the immediate points. There's a lot to this game that I want to explore. Now, a couple of issues. Production issues are crazy. Setup is a monster in this cruel joke. As I said, there's hundreds of hex tiles, and the game asks you to put out these trade goods, which you can collect by building on them, like 100 of the tokens. And then, Tony, you remove 75 of them after flipping them over. It's like, yeah, put all of these out and then undo all of your work. There's so much unused game board out there. Can't tell how many military people have in each region. There's no tension in military strength, therefore, because you can't compare your strength to somebody else's. And then, for God's sakes, include a scoring pad. Apparently, there was a scoring pad included in the Kickstarter, but not in the primary game, the retail game, and that's just absolutely cruel. There's so much scoring that you need to account for, and poor Nikki went out with her little notepad and peeled off 3 different empire scorings and then a final scoring, just dashing it down. And any single mistake there could be completely detrimental because we ended up having a tie game and I won for how much money I had in the end. So for God's sake, just include a scoring pad. Anyways, I want to play Mosaic again and again and again and again to test out these more risky strategies. However, I would never want to set it up, and I would never want to be the one owning it. So excited to play my friend's copy of Mosaic.
I thought you would like this game, Pat, because it is at its heart an engine building, card tableau building game, which is kind of your sweet spot here, and with a lot going on. So I figured if you love Dark Nova, I mean, it's obviously a totally different theme and not close to the same game, but I thought you would enjoy this, and I'm glad to see that you at least somewhat did.
Yeah, elements of Ark Nova as far as the tableau building, elements of Beyond the Sun as far as the racing, elements of underwater cities as far as the mid-game goals, and there's a lot here that I want to enjoy and explore. So excited to play more of it.
Let's jump right in with Big John in our Gen Con coverage. John, as Pat noted, is a core member of the Pilsen Game Group, which no longer really exists in its old form, sadly enough.
That's not true at all.
What's that?
That's not true at all. It's bigger and brighter and broader than ever. It is thriving.
It exist.
You got to put it into context. It's 30 people large instead of the original core 6. It's enormously large and successful.
But John and I are not part of that group.
John is still part of the group. John was playing there only 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Well, that was 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay, as of today, he's not part of the group. As of 2 or 3 weeks ago, he surely was.
John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello. I'm John. I'm part of the core Pilsen group. I recently moved to California, so not as frequent a visitor to the board game meetup as I used to be, but still active, playing lots of board games.
Good to have you, John.
Thanks.
Great to have you. It was great to play a million games with you. So I was going to tell the tale of getting lost in airports and trains and 3 different occasions sprinting through trains and airports and losing my heart pills and animal equality sweatshirt along the way. But that's probably not of great interest to our listeners and would take up our valuable time. So rather than tell our tales of how we got to Indianapolis or walking the show floor, why don't we just jump into what people want to hear about, the games?
Yes, the other story could be set for the Moth Radio Hour on NPR.
Tell it at the end. We'll throw it in the outro, okay? And we'll use it as a dry run for the Moth Radio Hour.
Okay, John, why don't we just catch people's attention right away and just jump into what was your favorite game you played at Gen Con?
Yeah, so initially I was going to say it was 3 Ring Circus, but after multiple plays now, it's changed to 4 Shuffle.
Cool. Well,
by far.
Wow. I want to tell a little story, and then you can tell why you like the game, John. I just want to tell the little tale of how we came to find Forest Shuffle, because this was not on our list of games that we were going to be engaged with, and I doubt we would have found it at random, except that I was at the cab stand at the Indianapolis airport and shared a cab with this scruffy-looking European fellow, and I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was an Asmodee higher up, which wasn't something I was particularly fond of, just, based on my anti-monopoly views. But I heard him out, and he said what he was really excited about at this show was this little card game called Forest Shuffle, which I'd never heard of. And he said it was Terraforming Mars meets Wingspan, which did not have me excited either, to be clear. But he said, go check it out. You'll be surprised. And then John and I were wandering the floor, and there it was. And so I said, why not? I was shocked at how much we enjoyed that first play and each subsequent play.
Yeah, definitely. And I've now played probably 10 games total and tried 4 or 5, maybe even 6 different strategies and been successful at all the different strategies I've tried. So I think there's a lot of depth there in the game, more than we even imagined.
Absolutely.
Tell us what Forest Shuffle is about. I've read the rules, but I'd love to hear it from you guys.
So the way this game works is on your turn, you either draw 2 cards or play cards into your tableau. It's that simple. Always one of those things. And the cards you play into your tableau start with trees, which all other cards have to be played next to. Then you play animals, plants, birds, all sorts of things around your trees. And one of the conceits of the games is that you can play above, to the left, to the right, or to the bottom of those trees, depending on what the card allows you. Some cards are split left and right and can be played to left and right of a tree. Another card is split top and bottom, like a tree card might have ferns on the bottom and birds on top, right? And the way you pay for these cards is with other cards. So cards are multi-use, not just from being split in half, but also for being currency for other cards. A card could be free, or it could be up to 3 cards. Usually most cards are like 1 card to put into play. And when you pay for a card, you put it in the center called the clearing, which becomes the market from which you can draw from. You can top deck cards, but you can also grab those cards from the market. So when you pay for a card with a card you don't want, it may be giving somebody else a card they really want. And inside of that basic structure, there are a ton of different strategies and a ton of different ways to score. It's like Wingspan point salad spatial times 11, right? You might have a plan of scoring for all these deer that you're playing and for the predators that are eating your deer, or you might have a bottom strategy that's got ferns and other plants and things that give you points for each of your plants, and things that give you points for each of your bottom cards. And every animal in the forest under the sun is there, and the cards look great and are luscious and beautiful. And the game just flies along. It finishes in half the time of Wingspan, probably 40 minutes once you know what you're doing with a few players. And there's a push your luck element to the ending. I think a bit like you said with Mosaic, because there are 3 winter cards in the bottom third of the deck, and when the third one comes up, the game ends immediately, and you score points. That's my brief roundup. Now, John, tell us why it was so fun to do all that.
Yeah, I think, it was really fun to do that just based on the variety of different trees and animals. And Tony, you neglected to mention lizards, which you really enjoyed playing.
That's true.
My favorite was when you and Wolfram were fighting over lizards to go under a tree. And the card art just draws you in. So even on your turn, or when it's not your turn, if you're not looking at the cards available, you're kind of looking at the animals in your tableau or the trees in your tableau. I didn't know what a linden tree was before this, and now I very well know what a linden is. The other aspect of the game, I think that you didn't mention, is that the manufacturing is such that there's no plastic components at all in the game. And the cards are made from recycled materials. So it's an eco-friendly game as well. So I thought that was kind of an interesting niche that it fits into as well.
So I can bury this box and start a tree from it. That's great.
You can. Perhaps that will be the next card. And then I like the concept of the cave, which lends itself to a milling strategy. So there's certain cards that allow you to take all the cards from the clearing and put them into your cave, or cycle your hand and draw up that many number of cards from your hand again. So maybe, you just want to speed up the game, and there's a mechanic to do that. It is tense at the end when that second winter card comes and you don't know when that third winter card is coming. You're like, oh my gosh, I've got 6 actions. How am I going to squeeze this all in? It was really great. And I would say the other strength is I've played it at 2, 3, 4, and 5 players now. And all player counts, it's about the same time. It doesn't take much longer if you have 5 players versus 2 players.
You have more cards in the game at 5
Yeah.
players, so each person gets a little more chance. But at any player count, it really zips along, even though you've got really tough decisions, because there's always like 4 different combo-rific things you want to do, but you can only do one of them on a turn. And when you do one, you have to kill off the possibility of another one because you're spending cards for that one and maybe giving Big John the cards he needs for his tree strategy at the same time you do that one.
Or even on the same card. Maybe you want to use both sides of the card, but you have to decide, do I want this fox or do I want this European hare? There's all sorts of interesting decisions to be made.
Well, thank you guys for the copy. I'm excited to play it. I've got it out sitting on my table, and it may give it a shot later today. But speaking of zipping along, I think you guys have like 19 games to talk about, so we should probably move on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. But we both unanimously recommend people hunt down Forest Shuffle. I think it's coming out very soon, if not out already. So, John, you were saying your initial favorite game, and now probably your second favorite game, was Ring Circus.
Yeah, Ring Circus. The theme is really interesting. It's, late 1800s, early 1900s, circus themed, B&B, not Barnum and Bailey, to avoid any kind of IP misappropriation. And each person who's playing the game takes on the role of a different circus company, and you're traveling around performing different shows on the map, in addition to building your tableau of performers and folks that would be in your troupe. As you're traveling around the country performing shows. And so every turn you either perform a show or place a performer into your tableau. And similar to Forest Shuffle, some of the cards that are in your hand have money on them, and that money is spent to put other performers in your tableau, or they can also be performers in your tableau. So there's hand thinning as well, and you gain more cards from going around and performing those shows around the map. The tableau building was a different mechanic for tableau builders than I'd ever seen, which is what attracted me to the game instantly. So I sat down for a demo play, and I knew 3 rounds in that I was going to love this game. And I certainly have. I've played it now 4 or 5 times, and tried different strategies with it as well. Actually, I recently tried a strategy where I performed very few shows, but just built a bunch of points in my tableau, which was expensive to build out, but it paid off in the end. So,
as I understand it, the tableau management has some proximal card on the left, card on the right effect. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a lot of cards that will give you either additional podiums for cards on your left or right, additional points based on certain performers to the left or to the right. Some will even give you additional movement, an additional money card. And then, once you, on the tableau itself, you start with a certain amount of movement and money cards you can gain when you perform a show. But as you build out your tableau, you're covering up those spaces. So you're more restricted in what you can do. And the one spot on the tableau allows you to switch any 2 cards from anywhere in your tableau. And then you have to switch them and follow the ordering mechanic of them as well, which is quite interesting. So the lowest value card always has to go on the left, and the highest value card always has to go on the right of a row. And there's 3 separate rows. And you can switch between any of those rows, just so long as they then reassign everything in that row to be in number order.
And then thematically, it's like you're a victim of your own success. You have more difficulty traveling around the country as you build up your troop larger and larger, right?
Yeah, and that's really crazy because I had games where I built up this incredible troop of performers and I really wanted to perform, but because I'd covered most of my travel icons, it was so hard to get to the places I needed to perform. It was like I couldn't get all my acrobats into the van fast enough.
Yeah, and in the big cities, you have to have certain cards to even enable a performance. And if you don't have those cards, you're just out of luck.
We want to see elephants. If it's elephants, it's not elephants, it's nothing.
And so there's some great things going on in a short game here. There's the area control fight of having done the most performances in the most regions. It really feels tense, like a race, because the token which controls the end of the game is this P.T. Barnum token circling the map, and it goes faster and faster because it skips the places on the track where people have put down tents where they've performed. So it seems like you have plenty of time, and then all of a sudden you realize you've got 1 turn left, and which performance are you gonna get done at that point? Also, the tableau building, because it has this weird element where if you buy a card that's cheaper than one that's already in that row, it's free. It's really counterintuitive to how you spend the money, and you realize you don't need as much money as you thought, but you realize the best thing to do is start another row, but that's going to be a whole bunch of money. I could just put a free card in the row that I already have. So it creates weird counterintuitive decisions. You never feel like at home and comfortable. You always feel like something's chasing you, even if it's just the P.T. Barnum token. So it while some of the mechanisms are familiar, it just doesn't feel like any other game of this type that I've played.
And I would add it at 4 players, that end game comes really fast because PT Barnum is moving from Indianapolis to Washington D.C. in 2 turns, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is really crazy how fast this is going to end up.
Seems like all these games recently have just sudden cinch points at the end, and how do you get everything done within those moments?
It's I think designers are discovering it's better than a game dragging, right?
Yep.
John and I also figured out the best way to beat Wolfram in one of these games, which is to make sure he does not know all the rules, particularly the rules about getting discounts on future purchases of cards
That's
based
good.
on what he's purchased before.
Smart, yeah.
So we were able to crush him pretty handily with him paying twice as much money for cards in his tableau as we were.
Good. That's not unfair at all.
Not at all.
The last thing I'll mention is the intermittent scoring mechanic is different as well. So it passes from last player, I guess, a counterclockwise fashion, and there's 4 intermittent scorings as well. So that's also a different little twist on the mechanic.
Cool. Well,
So that's out from Nidavellir, and that should be, I don't know if that's coming out at Essen or also coming out soon. Check it out, 3 Ring Circus. Another game which we both enjoyed came from Direwolf and Paul Denon, who's gotten a lot of acclaim for designing both Clank and Pat's favorite worker placement deck building mashup, Dune Imperium.
so good. Oh my god.
Anyway, he's quite the famous designer right now, and his latest effort is a polyomino game called Wild Tiled West. And while the title is a bit lame, the game itself is quite interesting. It's a chunkier polyomino game than most of these games are. It does the Barenpark thing of covering things on your board for bonuses, but it does it with more going on, more options for the boards you can use, more special abilities without being complicated or hard. And the most distinctive thing about it is the action selection mechanism by which you get tiles, which is a bunch of dice are rolled, and then there's this tile selection area, and each tile corresponds to a die. So it'll be like, in a 3-player game, there'll be 4 different options in that you take in rotating turn order, right? So that is both tough for people because they can't plan exactly what they're going to take, but it also makes you really, make lemonade out of lemons, right? So what would you say about Wild Tiled West, John?
I agree. I thought the title was fantastic. It was a pun on Wild Wild West that let you know that you're playing a tile laying game at the same time. So I actually thought the title was fantastic.
Fair enough.
I love how you could just take on the role of whatever kind of town and village you wanted to run. Whether it was, lawless or you were the sheriff and running around shooting the deputies or not the deputies.
You did that. You did actually kill one of your sheriffs at one point, John.
I did kill one of my sheriffs, but
He might have been a crooked sheriff.
It was.
So John's town was more like 1984, in which lawmen were killing anyone who moved, and my town was this lawless hellscape of bandits overrunning the place with a few ranchers mixed in.
Yeah,
And those are both workable strategies. So,
and it seems like the tile selection mechanism it's based off of a 20-sided die. Is that right? And then you can either select
It's a
left or
20
right.
and 8-sided dice.
Okay.
It's 20 D20 and D8, which you don't see often in board games.
And I liked that, even though it's very restrictive. And I do have one question about how there didn't seem to be enough tiles left at the end of the game to choose from, but maybe we did something wrong. I like having to not just get what I want and having to deal with something a little odd.
Yeah, and it definitely had the feeling of you're not going to accomplish everything you want to accomplish in the game, which gave it replay value for me. I did want to play it again, and full disclosure, I'm not generally a polyomino style tile laying game fan, but it was just really fun with the random third guy who we picked up to play with in the BGG Hot Games room, which I would call the best game in the BGG Hot Games room was finding a table that it was actually well lit enough that you could play a game.
Now, John, I don't know what you're talking about. You loved Horseless Carriage. That was like one of your top 10 of all time.
In the burn pile.
That one gets buried underground, huh?
It's right behind Betrayal of the House on the Hill or whatever that game is.
So from these games that we played, how about one that we both loved, but we only played half of the game? Listeners to this podcast will know that Pat and I, and I don't know if you are too, John, are big fans of Flat Out Games, who produce games like Calico and Cascadia. we wandered by their booth and they had this attractive little game called Nocturne there, which had a bunch of sort of magician-like foxes on beautiful artwork and cards that caught our attention. And we were informed this is the next flat-out Kickstarter coming in October, so we wanted to demo it. That took some work because the demo table was moving really slow, but we gutted it out, waited like 25 minutes, and got a table. And then, John, why don't you tell folks what Nocturne was all about?
Yeah, it's a very puzzly spatial bidding set collection game where you're a magician or somebody in the forest, and you're a mystic fox casting spells to collect an assortment of enchanted items. But the bidding process is a little unique in that you bid on a tile initially in hopes to end up that your people are bidding orthogonally to you to increase the bid. So the bid goes to the next. Not only it's not for the same tile that you initially bid on, but it moves around in the grid. So you're hoping that they take the path that you want them to take and get to the tile that you wanted at the beginning, and it can go to hell in a handbasket really fast.
And then the person who wins the bid takes the tile off the grid, puts it in their area. They'll score it at the end of the game. And then they start a new bid at a tile orthogonally adjacent to the one taken. And as tiles get taken, there are fewer and fewer spots. So you can sort of arrange this chain like you can build into a corner so no one can bid because there's no tiles adjacent to that one. So there's these smart spatial plays and ways of screwing other players out of what they want.
Tony was very good at that.
Well, I was very good at telling other players not to give John exactly what he wanted to get in the game. A key skill. Also, if you're losing bid, you can either take back into your hand or you can put it in this top area, which then becomes, depending on the order of the moneyed bids, some extra tiles that you can take at the end of the round. So it adds in
like a market.
And those tiles with very specific number bids on them are a bit like Nidavellir, in that you have those things.
Mm-hmm.
And we only played one round of two, but apparently in the second round, if you don't use certain tiles, they actually increase. You get your tiles back, but the ones you don't use are increased in value, which also remind me of Nidavellir. And it's really interactive and really mean, which isn't like most flat-out games, but it didn't feel like anything else they'd ever quite... It did and it didn't, right? It's beautiful, it's set collection, short little spatial puzzle, but the auction system was really cool.
I prefer to say that I did not lose, but I was setting myself up for the second round because I would have had the high.
You had a long-term strategy. Yeah,
I did. I had the end game in sight, not the mid.
No, this sounds really cool and like a very interesting way of forcing bidding to take place and forcing a waste of good bidding tiles like you might find in a game like High Society, but with a cool spatial element. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, super player interactive, super mean game.
Now, a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Highly anticipated release, not so much by us, but by people in general, is Ticket to Ride Legacy. Rob Davio, Matt Leacock doing their legacy thing for the famous Ticket to Ride series. And John and I just kind of wandered on it on the last day when there were fewer people there and got a free demo table and actually got to play the whole game for the first scenario, which is pretty short. And it follows the Ticket to Ride formula of, placing train cars from your cards, but it has a like jigsaw puzzle board, so you can see they're going to be adding more and more pieces of the US. You start on the East Coast and expand to the whole thing, and that looked really cool. There are also random events, which I was not quite as fond of. What did you think of Ticket to Ride Legacy?
It was Ticket to Ride with some other elements built in there. The scoring of the trains is a little different based on everybody's given a different color company railroad, and they get more points based on that. But I'm very curious to see how the Legacy game is going to develop, and you build out the map of the U.S. because it starts in the Eastern Seaboard. And so there's going to be elements in there that I think it'd be worth picking up. It was interesting enough for me.
Yeah, I think if you're a Ticket to Ride fan, this is going to be a huge hit for you.
100%.
If you're not, it's not going to save it for you, but Ticket to Ride folks are going to flock to this, I think. Let's give a game that was kind of disappointing for both of us, John. This is going to be Point City from AEG and the Flat Out Design team, and we usually love their games, so I guess maybe our expectations were a little high. And before we mention it, John, I don't know if you saw this, but I mentioned on my
did.
We misplayed one of the rules, which is clearly part of the reason. So big caveat here as to why we did not enjoy this. We should have been flipping over more building cards to choose from.
Yeah, because it just felt like we were just dirtling along and there was nothing really to do. And it was the most disengaged both of us were over 4 days playing games, for sure.
Now, it's a quick game. It's like designed to be a 20-minute tableau building city builder in which you're basically just flipping up cards in this grid and grabbing resources or spending those resources to buy cards that give you more buying power, Splendor style, or score you point. And in our error of how we were playing it, we weren't flipping up enough building cards, so there weren't a lot of options. You just bought what was there if you could.
Yeah, as I read by the designer, every time that you grab a card that's a resource, you put down a city. So there should be just dozens potentially out there, or at least many out there at any given time in the selection tableau.
Yeah, it obviously would have been more engaging, and we should probably retry it at that. I'm still not sure I'm going to like it as much as Point Salad, which has that delicious tension between the resource and the point scoring cards. Do I take a resource, or do I take a card that scores those resources? Because while you do have cards you're taking for resources and the cards you're buying, that's kind of feels like more standard tableau building stuff. So I think even as a better game, it'll feel less original and unique than Point Salad did.
Yeah, and I think part of that comes from we were reading the rule book in the poorly lit room. Next year, I'll note to bring a miner's helmet to
yes,
help me read.
We are blaming Board Game Geek
right?
for all our mistakes here.
No, not blaming them. It just didn't need to be lit up like a CSI crime scene on an alley at midnight.
But that's where Tony plays best against you.
Yeah. He's really hamstrung when he can't read the cards, so I do feel better about that.
Yes, it's a good strategy.
One of you is basically blind,
game.
and the other one is colorblind, so I think it's an even wash.
Yeah. So I don't know if you had any other games on your list, but I had a couple, and since you mentioned colorblind,
I have a few. Why don't we go back and forth with games that you played and I didn't, and then I played and you didn't? So go ahead.
Sure. So the first one I'll mention is Spellbook from Phil Walker Harding. I was just walking through the exhibitor hall, and they said, "Hey, do you want to play a demo?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So I sat down and played this game. I think it could be fun, but if you're colorblind, it is impossible. So it is a Splendor-like game where you're taking on the role of a mystic and you're building out different spells through 7 different colored, I think they're called materia. And each of those materia have one of 3 or 4 different symbols on the back of them. So the colors can't even be discerned from symbols. And they're also translucent. And oh, by the way, the colors of the stones don't match the colors of the cards. So I was just incredibly frustrated with playing the game. And the 7 colors are black, white, yellow, red, green, blue, and purple. And even it was just, I think it could be good, but I'm not sold on it just based on my colorblindness.
Yes. Don't do this, publishers. Make your games colorblind friendly. A game that I finally got to play at Gen Con that actually came out at Essen last year and has been sitting there, sadly, on the shelf of shame is the Mozart-themed heavy Euro game Lacrimosa, in which you are a patron of the arts who is buying up Mozart's work and then having it performed or selling it to somebody else, recruiting composers to finish Mozart's Requiem and getting credit for that, right? And there's the theme's cool, and there's some incredibly interesting mechanisms going on here. It's kind of a deck builder, and what I liked that made it unique in the deck building was you didn't just play a card to take your action on your turn. You played a card, and then you played a second card to the bottom of your player board. You would play on the top would be the action of the card you played up top to take the action, and then you play a card to the bottom, which would have a resource that you got at the end of the round. But then you wouldn't be taking that action in that round. So you'd go back and forth, and you might have, I forget what it was, like 8 cards, and you'd take 4 actions, right? And you'd choose which actions you took and which cards you did the bottom of, right? So that was a great mechanism that led to interesting choices. I also liked the area control fight, which was Mozart's Requiem, as you're hiring people and placing tokens down and covering tokens up that can't be moved. It's a little hard to describe without looking at the board, but it was a clever area control game. And then the beating heart of the game, though, was buying opuses and having them performed for rewards and then deciding when to sell them. And you also get cards that make them worth more when you perform them. So there's some engine building there. I found that it might be a dominant strategy to just buy opuses and sell them without even going through the performing phase. Because when you sell an opus on a lot of them, it raises your income, which gives you the money to buy more opuses. So it's buy and sell. I scored very high, and I'm not bragging because I didn't do that well in a lot of games I played this weekend, but that one I really did. So I think that might be a dominant strategy, but I'll have to play more to see. There's also an interesting aspect of traveling around Europe, which gives you extra actions or perhaps gives you more resources to do what you want to do. The whole thing, the look, the theme, the mechanisms are all great. I'm just wondering if that one strategy is a bit too strong. First play, though, so we'll have to see.
One game that I was also hoodwinked into doing a demo. They were desperately trying to get people to do demos, was called Get On Board. And this is kind of like Ticket to Ride meets a roll and write. You have 12 rounds in which you're building your best bus line around New York or London. Each player has a tableau, or not tableau, but a sheet with that you're scoring different things for, the number of grannies you pick up around town, the number of businessmen, the number of school kids, the number of tourists, a lot of different mechanics there. And each of the numbered rounds that comes out yields a different Tetris-like shape that you must put your bus route on. It was a fun little game for 35 minutes. So I would definitely check out Get On Board. I think it's from Yellow, or ILO, or however you say that company.
I think it's
but
Yellow.
it was yeah, it was really fun and satisfying to build and complete routes that you have from the beginning of the game, and getting them to see various tourist attractions around town, gaining victory points. So if you like roll and rights and you like Ticket to Ride, this is definitely something you want to give it a try.
Plus, if you like grannies.
What's that?
Plus, if you like grannies.
If you like grannies, that's how it was explained. You got to pick up grannies. The more grannies you pick up, they really multiply in points.
They give you a hug and bake you cookies.
I demoed a game from a famous designer, one of our anticipated games, and that's The Fox Experiment from Elizabeth Hargrave of Wingspan fame. I played a round of this game in which you are drafting foxes, both male and female, because you need a matching pair to breed foxes to get more and more human-friendly traits. This is based on the Russian experiments, where it turns out foxes make actually fine house pets if bred for those qualities, other than the fact that they tend to dig a lot in your backyard. But anyway, in this game, you're trying to get the right foxes to get better and better traits, and you roll dice for those traits to apply them, and you're trying to meet both immediate and long-term goals and in the kind of traits that your foxes get. And you actually redraft the foxes so you can get different foxes than you had the round before. And in addition to drafting foxes, you can draft these tokens, which give you resources and first player in the next round, right? It looks pretty simple. It looks Wingspan-esque in the weight, complexity, and toughness of the decisions you're making. It's too early to pass judgment, but it looks like a game that I would probably like but not love. So yeah, that's The Fox Experiment.
Another game I played was Bonsai. I'll admit I knew nothing about the game. I purely picked it based on the beautiful art of the cards and the box that I saw when I was prepping for Gen Con. And I sat down, and this is really you're taking on the role of an expert bonsai master, and whoever grows the best plant with numbers of flowers or numbers of fruits, numbers of woods, grass around the tree will win. And you simply take one of two actions. You meditate, which basically gets you a card from the deck, or cultivate, which is growing your bonsai. And if you take cards from the deck or that are open on the display, you get some accompanying, let's say, parts of your bonsai to go with it. And there's some scoring cards in there. It is a very relaxing game to play. The most tense part of the game was I was playing with a father and his daughter, and the father kept trying to tell his daughter what to do, and she was really getting angry with him about telling her how to grow her bonsai tree. The one thing I would say about this game is you really need to spread out, because the bonsai grows fast, and before long you're having to take maybe suboptimal action so you're not colliding with someone else's bonsai tree. But for a 30 to 40 minute game, I really enjoyed optimizing how I could grow the hexagonal tiles on my bonsai tree to have the most fruit and meet the endgame goal conditions and some of the endgame scoring points. So I think that one is not fully out yet, but it will be at Essen. I would definitely check out Bonsai. It's an anticipated game for me.
I'm jealous. I tried to get a seat at the table when I was with you. You got in there at another time, but it was difficult to get seats for Bonsai. There was only one person teaching, and the other two were being taught by app, and those games were taking a while to complete. So yeah, I'm jealous you got in there, and I want to grow bonsai trees too.
Yeah, honestly, in the end, we just sat down and read the rule books and taught ourselves, and we learned it in about 15 minutes.
Perfect.
So
yeah,
it's a really quick teach.
From a light game like Bonsai to a heavy game that we were all really anticipating, at least Pat and I were, a game not available for sale. I think it's coming out at Essen, but for demo, is Nucleum from both Simone Luciani and David Turchi. Simone Luciani being one of my favorite Eurogame designers.
And David Turchi being one of mine.
One of Pat's, right? And in this game, I didn't play this game, and I couldn't even get in on the demo, although I tried a couple times. But I did watch the pitch of the play. I did watch the rules explanation from the demo and watched other people demoing the game for about 15 minutes. And what you're doing is you're building these power plants, these nuclear power plants, and connecting them up back to where you're putting buildings to power up buildings. And the spatial connected way you're doing this gave me vibes of Luciani's Barrage in how you're doing this and the potential meanness and cutting other players off. I also got vibes of Brass in the way that there was coal, and coal would get more expensive as it ran out, and that you could replace it with this other better energy called nuclear power as you went along. It also had this thing that reminded me of Barrage as well, in that you could, at the end of your turn, actually, this part didn't remind me of Barrage. At the end of your turn, you could take a recharge turn in which you reset everything and got your bonuses back and got income, but you only got bonuses based on how many cards you'd played and turns you'd taken. This level would move up. It reminded me of the Assault of your Giant. Remember the Assault of the Giants war game, John?
Oh, yes.
In how that if you took a turn and got all your cards back, the power you got was proportional to how many cards you'd actually spent before that. Well, this mechanism is now in a heavy Euro game. And then what you'd accomplished would enable you to place this victory point scoring token on this other track, but you couldn't play in an era you'd played on a previous round. It's got all the Euro-y goodness. It's grabbing mechanisms from everywhere, but it really looked like a lot of fun and had a unique table presence to it as well. So I'm really looking forward to Nucleum coming out at Essen.
I just signed up for their giveaway contest because I want it now.
Perhaps the last one I'll mention is I stopped by and looked at Pampero, which is a new wind turbine construction game to build on wind energy. I think it's based in Uruguay. The country is concerned about dependence on fossil fuels. I watched it. I didn't get to demo it myself, but I saw it being played. It's a hand management game. You have a starting set of cards to be put onto your tableau, and you activate different actions to activate different sectors on the board. And you can either play a card into your tableau or retrieve the cards, much like the game you were just describing, Tony. And then after, I don't remember the number of actions, maybe it was 2 or 3 actions, there's another phase that takes place where you retrieve the rightmost card from any row and then generate energy based on that, collect income, and advance the game timer. And the player with the most money at the end wins. It looked very interesting. However, it was also enormous.
Yeah.
Pat, think like Horseless Carriage, but 50% larger.
Sounds good. I like it.
I dismissed it immediately because of the box size and knew I'd never get it back to New Jersey.
Yeah, no, I want it. It's Julian Pambo, too, who is one of Vital Lacerda's developers for his games, and I think it has similar, well, I need to do this before I can do this, but if I do that first, it's inefficient, and I guess I could draw back now and get some sort of income for the row, but I could also get income for the column, which is a different kind of income, and just kind of melts your brain. It looks really good.
It looks amazing on the table.
Amazing. It was literally and figuratively a heavy game.
I've got one more that John and I played together, which was Ryan Lockett's Nightfall, which was a skirmish game rather than a storybook or Euro game, which Lockett is most known for. He actually had a co-designer on this game, but still very unusual for Red Raven Games to do a skirmish game. And it's a team skirmish game where players went back and forth. Your team didn't take actions, each player did. You were either on the side of the knights or the demons, and the demons maybe were a little more powerful and could also kill these elders on the board for points, but the knights got points automatically at the end of each turn. And what you would do is you would draw some cards and you would play 3 of them, which would do special powers and different things, and then you had a generic one for generic things like move, right? And take a bunch of actions. You'd have a unique player power and do all sorts of wacky things to kill opponents and move around the board. And then if you got killed, that gave the opponents a point, and 10 points wins the game. But you would just get a new character with new special abilities. So I think what had this game not really work great for us was that it was 3 versus 3, and a 6-player skirmish game going back and forth was just too much, too long between turns, too much chaos. Some of my teammates, I think, didn't like the game because of that. I think it would have worked quite well at 2v2, but I think they were trying to cram in more demos, so they in the space they had, so they went 3v3, which is a bit of a mistake. Anyway, for a 2v2 skirmish game, though, I think you could do worse than Nightfall.
Yeah, and I also think, you said the time between turns was too much. Yeah, at one point I actually got up to go to the bathroom after my turn, and I came back, and it was still, 2 turns to go before my turn again for a 45-minute game. It had some interesting mechanics, but much like you said, the disincentive for, my knight doesn't need to live, I'll just get another one. it kind of made the concept of healing your character pointless to me. So I wasn't sure why I would ever do that other than to save some points at the end. Overall, yeah, I think you're right. At a 2v2 game, it would be much more manageable than the 3v3, which we demoed it.
One last thing you could tell us about John. John and our friend Wolfram even more worked at the CGE booth, and the CGE's big release this year coming at Essen is a game called Kutna Hora, which Wolfram was actually demoing a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that looks like a very interesting chunky Euro.
Yeah, I did. It did work for CGE this year as a volunteer. I demoed mostly the new Arnak expansion, which was the hotness, I guess, coming into it. And it was great to actually see it finally hit the table. And I've been playtesting for a while. But Kutna Hora is the other big game that's coming out, I believe, at Essen. And they were demoing the game there was so many demos of Kutna Hora going on, and each one was, fully jam-packed. It's a Euro game, and it's every action you take has an impact on the economic engine of the game. And so players take turns with actions from some double-sided cards to maybe go mining or purchase a plot of land or raise a building for your guild that you're trying to please, or get profit from your production, and ultimately leading to the construction of St. Barbara's Cathedral. It's an asymmetric, and the guilds have asymmetric player powers, so it's a really interactive game. And I think the tightness is going to come from, do I take income now when it's high, or do I wait another round and potentially some other player's action lowers my income by a certain amount? I think it's going to be a great game. I plan to pick it up. I actually only got to demo it myself for about 30 minutes, but it looks fantastic. It's a total economic engine building game with some hand management, some plotting, and city management as well. So I think it's going to be a great game.
Cool. Well, I will just mention one other game that was kind of my FOMO ill-advised purchase of the con, which was I picked up Jerusalem, actually with the ancient spelling is like Jerusalem. It was an ill-advised purchase because the game is already out in retail, which I didn't realize. So I ended up not being able to fit it in my bag and selling it on the cheap to Wolfram. But anyway, it's a really cool looking game with a great theme about getting your followers to the table of the Last Supper where Jesus is preaching, right? And you're doing all these things and listening to parables and traveling across the desert and doing Eurogame things. You're engine building and you're using deck building to do this. And then there's this mean area control about placing your followers near Jesus and moving other people's followers out of there. And I was like, I never realized the Last Supper was so cutthroat. And the demoer started laughing. But if you want a cutthroat game about the Last Supper, I think this might be your only choice.
And I think
that it looks like an excellent Euro game, and it's from Devere.
And I feel like it's one of the only like Bible or religious-based games that I've seen in mass market, or excuse me, as far as hobbyist board games, which is kind of cool because it seems that there's a lot to tap into there, and honestly will probably only widen the audience.
Yeah, and it did not look like it sacrificed the Euro-y goodness to the theme either, so the mechanisms look great as well. So that's something I want to try. I also have some other games. I did the AEG Big Game Night and played 4 of their games. I all enjoyed to varying degrees, and I wrote them up on my blog. And there's other things that we probably just don't have time to squeeze in that we took a look at that were interesting. But go check out the blog. You'll see some other game write-ups. And all in all, John, didn't this kind of reinvigorate your gaming enthusiasm to be there?
It really did. I was kind of in a lull of like, okay, I'll play this game, but I'm not really excited about it. And I played a lot of games that I just want to get back to the table again. So, I enjoy Gen Con significantly, and I hope to go again next year.
Me too. And my only regret might be that we didn't get to play as opposed to demo more heavy Euros. I mean, we almost played Barcelona, but when it was like 10 p.m. and we were trying to sort through the rule book, we just eventually bailed on it.
What do you make of the action selection? As I understand it, you're basically selecting from a 5x5 grid with a diagonal running through in order to perform your actions. And it seems like it's really allows you a lot of leeway as far as what do you want to do to rebuild the city of Barcelona.
Yeah, it looked really cool. I got some Lisboa vibes from the grid of rebuilding in a heavy Euro.
Right.
But it looked really cool because, each street is an action. So you build at an intersection and you get 2 actions on your turn from each street intersecting. The 2 streets intersecting is really cool action selection. And you get to take big chunky turns where you get a lot done. And it feels thematic and it looks great on the table. It's just too many games and we're too tired and too little time.
Yeah, apparently games that take place in the Iberian Peninsula are very strong in the diagonals.
Exactly. Anything else for you, John, on Gen Con or board games in general?
No, nothing else on Gen Con, but it was great to get to play a bunch of games with you and Wolfram. And
It was fantastic. Even the crowds, which I was kind of leery about, post COVID, it was definitely a feeling of camaraderie there. More games than one could possibly play. I know there's a million hot games we didn't even mention on this podcast.
yeah,
That's Gen Con. There's always more there than you can possibly imagine.
it was like, ooh, shiny object. And then you get drawn in, and then you don't find the shiny objects you were actually looking for.
Yeah.
Well, sounds like it was a great time, guys, and it sounds like it was a lot of new games that you guys got to play. I'm glad that you both feel reinvigorated for gaming, and I hope to play with you guys soon.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
Just
I may be
come meet us at
playing
an airport. We'll play Forest Shuffle.
There we go.
Yeah, we played that's how good Forest Shuffle was. We played a game. Our gates were right next to each other in the airport, and we played another game in the airport.
Well, maybe we can all meet for a layover fairly soon.
And we dragged another Gen Con attendee into that game who just happened to be nearby, and we slaughtered them mercilessly.
Yeah.
Gen Con, go do it. And Pat, I may be coming to Chicago. It's possible. No, I'm not saying probable, but possible in the late summer, early fall. In which case, I'll let you know, and we'll
I'll
play
be
some
back in
games.
October.
When
I
did
will
I
be in Chicago.
Let's schedule something. We can have a Chicago con.
I was telling Pat I didn't think we were going to get all this done in this period of time, and while we left out some games, we really did that in timely, crisp fashion. Thank you guys.
Yeah, I didn't know how much to go into detail on things, but
I think it was perfect. I think it moved along really nicely, and I think we each had succinct things to say, and it worked.
Well, I was just going to say, I think you guys could give me a little bit of outro material if you have any particularly wacky stories. Forgive me, I now have a live band playing behind me right outside of my window. So if you hear pleasing, artful music, you know why.
I do not hear any pleasing artful music.
Guys, thank you so much for your Gen Con thoughts. If our audience members have any Gen Con thoughts, they can share with us on our Discord in the link in the show notes. Also, check out Tony's blog post on the Gen Con experience, also located in the show notes, or he's on Max Longstreet, The Secrets of Great Games on Board Game Geek. Also, write us an email if you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns. We're at TwoWoodForAWheat@gmail.com. Next episode, it sounds like we're reviewing Forest Shuffle based off of just all of the hype about it. I think that's an easy segue there. So I'm going to go bust out my game later today, most likely, with some friends who are coming over to play some games. So aside from that, thanks, folks. Stay frosty. We'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.
Two Wood for a Wheat is recorded across the airwaves in Bear Creek, Pennsylvania, and Chicago, Illinois. We're produced by Tony Faber and edited by Patrick Flannery. Follow us on Instagram at TWFAW and find more episodes and blog posts at TwoWoodForAWheat.com. I'm going to go shower and then go participate in this jam band, put on my new hat, and grab a ukulele and get out there.
Are you?
No, I don't do
Go
that.
pass a hat. Get another hat and get some tips.
That's a good idea.
Most of my wild, wacky stories about Gen Con involve me sprinting from one place to another. So, yes, sprinting when they changed the track of my train, sprinting underneath through a tunnel underneath and hopping on a train at full speed. Or when my electronic ticket didn't work, sprinting to the cutting the line in the airport to the Spirit Airlines customer service personnel. And then having, again, my heart pills fall out of my bag as I sprinted back through security and had security scream at me. There was also...
You don't need heart pills.
At the AEG Big Game Night, I hadn't been there in 4 years, so I stupidly assumed that it was still in the same place it was before. It wasn't, which I noticed it had been moved to Lucas Oil Stadium where the Colts play football. And I then had like 3 minutes to get from the convention center there. So I sprinted there, strained my quad, and stumbled through trying to figure out where in Lucas Oil Stadium this event was, which I eventually found just as games were starting.
Yeah, my foot is healing nicely as well from running up the down escalator.
Oh, that was the best. That was John thought we were going down. We weren't. We told him, and he tried to run up the down escalator, and he did a full Buster Keaton. Was it who was it? It was more Chris Farley, maybe. Anyway,
I don't know. I don't recommend trying to run up a down escalator after not sleeping for 36 hours. Not one of my.
It was pretty much a full face plant, and And Wolfram and I were howling and felt bad about our laughter later when Jon was like icing his ankle for the next 2 days.
There's your outro material, Pat.
Thank you. I'm glad you survived.